Great. Well, we're, as I mentioned, delighted to have Kevin Kennedy here, who for the last 2 years has served as the regional humanitarian coordinator for Syria. And I think Kevin is leaving his post and is on his fifth retirement from the United Nations. So I have no doubt we will welcome you here again in a different role after you enjoy some retirement. Kevin.
Thank you, Stefan. Thank you very much, and thank you for being here this afternoon. As Stefan indicated, I'm finishing my assignment as the United Nations Regional Humanitarian Coordinator for the crisis in Syria, probably the longest title in the UN system, coming back home. And I thought I'd take this opportunity to update you on the humanitarian situation in Syria and surrounding countries. And unfortunately, I don't have a lot of good news. The people of Syria, Syrian people remain in grave difficulty, often denied assistance, living under constant threat of violence from all sides. The numbers in this crisis can be overwhelming, but just a few for your consideration. There's about 18 million people in Syria today. Of those 18 million, we estimate just under 14 million are in need of some form of humanitarian assistance. That's 70%, 75%. Of the population, over 1/3 are internally displaced, and many people have been displaced more than once, 2, 3, 4 times, and lost their possessions, their homes, their cars, wedding photos, and most importantly, often their dignity and their safety. There are, as you know, about 5 million Syrians in the neighboring countries, principally Turkey, Jordan, and Lebanon, and really great credit to those 3 countries for what they've done, their hospitality, their generosity. Without their assistance and support, we would really be in deep difficulties. We have about 4.5 million people in the so-called besieged and hard-to-reach areas. Now, a besieged area is an area that is surrounded militarily, that there is no freedom of movement by the people in that area, and they do not receive assistance on a regular basis or at all. So you're talking over 4.5 million people. It's a lot of people who are in the most desperate need of those people in Syria, surrounded by government Syria forces and their allies, by Daesh, and by some of the opposition groups as well, too. I mean, a couple of features of the operation and the humanitarian conditions in Syria, when our access remains very difficult. And if you use cross-line convoys as a barometer of access, it's a rough barometer, and a cross-line convoy are those convoys that go from within Syria, from a government area to a non-government area, and usually these besieged and hard-to-reach areas. And to give you a rough idea, since between the 1st of January of this year and the end of May, we requested 82 convoys, and we've accomplished 13 of those 82. So our batting average, as you would see, is pretty low. Stopped in some cases for security, but more often than not through bureaucratic delay, administrative problems, etc. The net result is they don't happen, and people go without assistance. I think also another feature of this war, which I think is one of the most egregious and terrible aspects of the Syrian conflict, is the persistent bombing of hospitals and medical facilities. In the first 5 months of this year, maybe 6 months, we have reports of 96 bombings of hospitals and clinics. We've confirmed 60 of them. 15 doctors and nurses have lost their lives, another 3 or 4 dozen injured. And this is just part of a long pattern of bombing hospitals and clinics, which have taken the lives of hundreds of doctors and nurses. If you're a doctor or nurse and you're working particularly in an opposition-held area, and you go to work at the hospital or clinic, you're working in a building with a big bullseye on its roof. This continues and it's a terrible thing. I would say, despite all this, the United Nations, the NGOs, both national and international, the Red Crescent movement, continue on. I mean, on an average month, World Food Program, for instance, feeds 6 million people in Syria. That's 1/3 of the population. It's an enormous effort. And WHO, UNICEF, UNHCR, other agencies have similar operations on a grand scale. It's a large, I hesitate to say the largest humanitarian crisis since World War II, but if it's not, it's very close to that. Maybe the Balkans, I don't know, but this is an extraordinary operation. It also is a complex operation. Complex is probably an overused adjective in the UN, but this involves 5 countries. It involves over 300 organizations. operating from within Syria, from Turkey, from Lebanon, from Jordan, from Iraq. It involves all kinds and manners of agencies and NGOs, etc. It's quite an operation. And my task, the task of our team on the ground, was to, as much as possible, produce an efficient, coherent, and effective operation to meet the needs of those people in need. I would highlight really two aspects of this crisis, this response that I think deserve attention. And the first, to give great credit to the people on the ground, UN, NGOs, Red Cross, Red Crescent, who have remained on the ground. And I've said before a couple times, I think back to August of 1998. You may recall that the United States attacked Osama bin Laden in Khost in eastern Afghanistan. They missed. But the UN's reaction at that time was to evacuate, to relocate all international staff from the country of Afghanistan for 6 months. That's like having a problem in New York and evacuating Chicago. This has changed. And on the ground today in Syria, we have approximately 200 international staff, along with hundreds of national staff who have stayed there despite being bombed, being shot at, having mortars land around your headquarters on a weekly basis, etc., have stayed in the ground despite suffering casualties. And this also goes for the NGOs operating cross-border who have suffered more casualties. And the people carried on. I think it's actually, just to probably raise the bar for member states' expectations of UN in crisis situations, because unlike 20 years ago, we do stay. I'd also add, in this operation, from my experience, I've worked in quite a few emergencies. This is the first operation where national NGOs, I think, are given full credit and taken fully into account. Too often, my experience, they're sort of ignored or not paid attention to. Here, national NGOs from within and without the country are part of our leadership group. Their views and considerations are taken, I think, into account in a big way, and they're an essential part of the operation. They carry on at great sacrifice. Maybe one last point, too, and be available for your questions. Something of interest today, of course, is the situation in Raqqa in northeastern Syria, where, as you would know from the news, there's an ongoing offensive led by the Syrian Democratic Forces, a largely Kurdish group with some Arab allies, supported by the United States and others, to drive Daesh or ISIS out of Raqqa governorate. It is obviously has humanitarian impacts, which I think we're responding to reasonably well in a very complex situation. It also has protection concerns as well, too, as IDPs or displaced people come out of Raqqa City or Tapka places, head north to safety, and have to go through various screening operations by Kurdish forces and have their papers taken and all. So there are concerns here how they're going to fare, as well as, and this is throughout the country, and you see reports all the time, bombing in built-up areas is taking a toll on civilian lives. And in fact, I was just informed this morning, 5 members of the family of one of my staff members were killed this morning in Raqqa, or yesterday in a coalition bombing. This goes on, and all measures must be taken to stop this. So maybe I'll stop there and be available for questions. So that's okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Maggie?
Thanks, Mr. Kennedy. Margaret Bashir with Voice of America. I did want to ask you a little more about Raqqa, if you could take it a little further. Mr. O'Brien also touched on it briefly this morning in the Security Council. He said the situation is dire. Could you expand on the humanitarian situation in the city? And he also said there's about 50 to 100,000 residents still there. Does that match up with your figure? And you started to talk about when people leave, they head north. Is the border with Turkey open? I mean, where do they go exactly? And do you have camps to receive them? If you could just give us some more details.
No, thank you. Good question. The population of Raqqa City, prior to the initiation of hostilities some months back, we estimate there were 229,000 people in Raqqa City. Today, we estimate between 50 and 100,000, Mr. O'Brien said this morning. When they depart, not all, but most of the displaced people move north towards the Turkish border. They do not go into Turkey, but there are a number of camps supported by UNHCR and NGOs. I say they're camps. They're really transit sites, because most of the people in that region will move on and to shelter with relatives, with family, friends, etc., and really don't remain in camps. It's unlike Iraq, where I previously served. The transit site, Anisa, and also a place called Mabruka, which I can show you in the map afterwards, up north, we support, and that's where the concerns come up. Most people come, they present their papers are taken, they're screened by the SDF forces guarding the camp. Most receive their papers back, but some do not, I guess, as they're being checked out for security reasons. So it's left behind probably in an ISA camp, I'd say in the range of maybe 5,000 people who are sort of in a administrative limbo at the moment. There also are reports of conscription of child soldiers, other things, and conscription in general of these displaced people as well too. These are concerns that we've raised with the coalition repeatedly, and we're hoping to see improvement.
And then just also on the humanitarian situation, food, water, electricity. I mean, what's the situation?
Well, in Raqqa City itself, the water pumping station has been damaged. Electricity and water are in short supply, rationed every day. In some of the neighboring cities, Karama and Tabqa, there are also issues with that. Agencies, UNICEF in particular, is trucking water to different places and have arranged for, particularly in the camps, for improved water and sanitation and hygiene. It's a little complicated. The real break has come, and I have to acknowledge the help of the government of Syria in this case. We are now able to move supplies from our warehouses in Aleppo City, northeast actually, through Manbij onwards to Raqqa and Hasaka governorates. I don't have a map here, but it's a long trip, but we're adequately supported in Aleppo, and having this access, in fact, has enabled us to stop the airlift as of a couple of days back, which was an expensive proposition, $45,000 a flight for months on end. So now I think we're in good shape in terms of stocking up the supplies. The problem has become, because the security in lots of areas is pretty dodgy, and the displaced people have tended to come in big surges. So suddenly you'll have 25,000 people on your doorstep, and you might not learn about it at time enough as we would like. So we're working to improve our collection of information in different ways, and hopefully you respond. And we've stockpiled things both, of course, in neighboring Iraq, in Aleppo, as well as in these camps.
Matthew,
Thank you so much, Abdulhamid Sayam from the Al-Quds Al-Arab. It's always a pleasure to see you, Mr. Kennedy, and I want to wish you a great retirement.
If it sticks, yeah.
Thank you.
He's not very good at that.
I have a few questions. First, I want you to tell us about the level of cooperation between the humanitarian program and the Syrian government. And the second, about casualties that the UN had to pay in Syria. How many of our colleagues had died in Syria? And the last is, you have served in many emergency missions, and what lessons you can pass to your successors in this very difficult job. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, our relationship with the government of Syria is often a difficult one. We meet regularly with them. In some cases, we're helped out. In some cases, we're not helped out. I mean, our concern continues to be our ability to move about the country. For instance, in this Raqqa response, the UN is based in Qamishli City, which is up in the northeastern part of the country, controlled by the government of Syria. We really need to reinforce our staff up there, to have more staff on the ground to respond to this crisis, move staff around. We've yet to receive permission to send all people up there to work. So, for instance, my own department, OCHA, we've been asking for permission to send people for a couple of years now without success. So you lack the hands-on deck that you need to really be as effective as you would like to be. So it matters large and small. It's difficult. In other instances, we have excellent cooperation, and it works. It's a day-by-day thing. I give great credit to our resident coordinator, humanitarian coordinator on the ground, Mr. Ali Al-Zatari. He has a challenging task, which he accomplished, I think, very, very well. And we'll go from there. The numbers of staff killed, it's a matter of great interest to me for different reasons. I think the latest number off the top of my head, and this is a collective UNRWA, UN agencies, and others, is about 87 since the start of the war. I could be wrong on that. I'm equally concerned, maybe more concerned with the number of NGOs lost. The count also can be a bit amorphous, because what is a humanitarian worker? How is he or she defined? But the numbers I've seen, the people who try to keep count of this, are in the hundreds, maybe 600 or 700 deaths. Now, in a crisis like Syria, where estimates of people killed, whether military or civilian, range up to 450,000 over the last 6.5 years, 7 people is obviously a very small slice of the pie, but very tragic, and of course impacts on our ability to deliver. I'll have to think about your question, larger thoughts about to pass on to an emergency. I mean, I guess if I thought about it, one is to you have to think big, and you have to push your principles all the time. You have to push for access. You have to remain principled. And I think at the end of the day, a worker should be able to look him or herself in the mirror and say, have I done everything I could today to help, in this case, the Syrian people? And if the answer is no or not quite, then you have to get back to work. Thank you.
Matthew Lee, Inner City Press.
Yes,
Thanks.
Matthew.
Thanks a lot. Glad to see you. I wanted to ask you, I'm sure both about the OCHA report on presence and proximity, stay and deliver.
Yeah.
I think you were a part of it, and it seemed to be it seemed to indicate you were saying that there's been a big change in terms of staying present.
Yeah.
One aspect of that report seemed to be that some developed world NGOs are actually not present, but are subcontracting the work to locals, raising money as if they were there, and in one case, highlighted in the Guardian, kind of blackmailing a group, saying we won't fund you unless you stay and deliver in Al-Qaeda territory. So I wanted to know, how prevalent is that? And what is OCHA going to do to make sure that its funds aren't flowing to groups that are in fact forcing others to be cannon fodder?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Well, the last point first, OCHA is not a big funder, so that's not the issue. No, I saw that. In fact, I was actually, the Guardian called me about that report. I did not have a chance to read it in full. I'm too busy filling out retirement papers and things. But I'm only kidding. No, I mean, normal operations, Syria, other countries as well, whether it's UN agency or an NGO, their work is often subcontract to another NGO or a national NGO, as the case might be. And I think you see in Syria where there are security restrictions on people operating who are non-Syrian, for instance. And I think each organization has to make its own judgments as to what level of risk they're willing to accommodate. And I think some are obviously more conservative than others, as the case might be. So you see this. I'm not familiar with this particular case. It was referenced in the report, Matt, but perhaps it's happened. But by and large, and I work with all of the NGOs who operate from Jordan and Syria, most all of them, hundreds of them. I mean, I think the relations there are pretty good. And, of course, in this case, it's either Syrian NGOs or Syrian nationals employed by international NGOs who carry on the work, and also, for that matter, for UN agencies as well, too. I think it's a division of labor that you put up with. People would prefer to be on the ground, and obviously some organizations are more conservative than others, but this is in every crisis.
Can I just want to ask one thing?
Sure.
You were quoted in it, and you seem to say that, drivers, and I'm sure, I think you said that we hired some drivers and they were shot.
Right.
Who's the we if it's not OCHA? And also, what's the duty of the UN system to people that it hires? What's the follow-through on that?
That's a very good question, Matthew, duty of care. In this case, these were 2 drivers who were shot last week when a UN agency, UN and Red Crescent convoy, 2 organizations, were about to enter eastern Harasta, which is a besieged area. And as there were problems at the checkpoint, they were leaving. There was some fire from who, you don't know, and 2 drivers were injured. Now, as is often the case, this again is worldwide, not just Syria, when an agency or an NGO runs a convoy, they'll hire trucks. They'll hire, ABC trucking company to do the lift because they don't have big fleets of trucks in that case. The duty of care of the driver, it's a tricky question. This person, in this case, is not part of the UN system, to be clear, not part of the UN security management system, as I understand it, and as the former head of DSS. But we do, as best as we can, extend and look out for them as well as we can and look after their interest. I'll admit it's sort of a murky area in this case. It's a contractor. The contractor, the employer, he or she has responsibilities. But, this, again, you use different assets, different capacities, different places to make things happen. We don't all have it in-house.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kennedy. It's Pamela Falk from CBS News.
Sure.
Stephen O'Brien and you both talked about the delays at checkpoints.
Yeah.
and he said the bureaucratic delays that leave convoys vulnerable at checkpoints are operating at night. Can you characterize that? I mean, is that pointing the finger specifically at the Syrian government? Is it different reasons for bureaucratic delays? And how much of it would you say is intentional? And you mentioned the number, I wasn't 100% clear, the 80 out of 82, 32.
13%.
Or I thought it was 32, but anyway, got in. Is that all the bureaucratic delays? And then as a follow-up to the bigger picture question, you've been there 2.5 years, but you went, if I remember correctly, way back when. Can you give some philosophical view or, I mean, characterize how Syria has changed since the first time you were there to today for those who don't know it or don't follow it as well as today? As we do, I mean. Thank you.
Well, the first question on the convoys, and again, our staff on the ground, led by UN staff from Damascus, Tartus, Latakia, Homs, Aleppo. I mean, we're all over the country. These convoys often take an enormous amount of time. They'll leave early in the morning at 0:30 and be stopped at checkpoints. Whether it's the word not getting down the chain of command, whether it's deliberate, whether it's the local commander acting in his own, whether it's Hezbollah versus government of Syria versus some government-aligned militia, whether it's opposition militia in some cases, it really varies. I think that one thing, I didn't mention this, that comes out, I think Stephen mentioned it this morning in his briefing, it's another terrible thing, where we get the green light to conduct these convoys, and you get to the checkpoint, last checkpoint, and the government personnel remove the medical supplies, or at least some of the medical supplies, from the convoy. Supplies are urgently needed by people who have been bombed and been shot, need sophisticated surgical supplies. But even in some cases, people taking things like diarrhea pills or diapers off the convoy. For whatever reason, I don't know. So it's a sustained pattern now. I mean, what the reasons are, it could be many, but this has happened now for years and years and years. Okay? Syria changing. I don't get there as often as I would like. I was denied a visa the last couple of times. But I mean, certainly this war has torn apart. And you see pictures and places in Aleppo and Homs and some of the destruction in these places. It's extraordinary. It reminds you of Mogadishu in '92 or Beirut during the Civil War. Massive destruction. And it will take an enormous effort and a lot of resources to rebuild Syria as it is too. As to the social cohesion and comity of the country, I'm no expert on this, but obviously this civil war, which has rendered cities and families and villages apart, those wounds will take a long time to heal. I think like any civil war. I think this country's taken, I think we're still healing from the civil war. That's my personal view. Thank you.
Yeah, Joseph Klein, Canada Free Press. Two questions. First of all, could you comment on the white helmets, what role they play? There's been some controversy as to whether they are truly serving a humanitarian purpose or have other agendas. And secondly, you mentioned hiring of contractors. What kind of vetting, if any, is UN able to do in terms of who these contractors are, who they're affiliated with? Are they government run and therefore monies are going in effect to prop up the Assad regime? Are they related to Hezbollah, et cetera? I mean, could you comment on that? Thank you.
Yeah, sure. The white helmets, I'm not all that familiar with them. I know they respond in very difficult circumstances. I know they lost a lot of people and on the ground, and as far as I'm concerned, that's perfectly fine. Contractors, there's a lot of contractors. In the case of, say, for instance, our cross-border operations, and particularly coming from Turkey and Jordan. We hire, I say we, UN agencies, NGOs, hire trucks in Syria to deliver our supplies. These people are from these areas, they know these areas, and they know what's safe and what's not safe, and they go forward. Inside Syria, when you're hiring contractors, it's not always possible to do all the due diligence you'd want to. You do as much as you can. As you would know, Joe, it's sort of a controlled economy in many ways. Many things are connected to the state. We look at a company, I think, and try to make sure that they will abide by the contract that we offer them. How they're connected sometimes to other people, places, is pretty hard to determine in some ways too. So we do what we can. I mean, if you want to have telephone services, well, there's like one telephone company. So what's the choices here? Thank you. Masood? I'm sorry.
Hi, it's Nina Larson from I24 News.
Hi.
I hope this isn't too difficult a question, but
If it is, I'll say it. I'll pass it to
please
Savannah. That's
feel
okay.
free.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask your opinion on this idea of safe zones. Presumably, if they become a reality, your agencies would be operating in them. What
Right.
would you need on the ground in practical terms? And are you having any communication with Iran, Turkey, Russia on working with them for these plans?
No, thank you. Very good question. As people in the room probably would know, the safe zones or interim de-escalation zones or de-escalation zones or de-escalation areas, a number of different titles of these things, have been in the news here for several months now. And long story short, it's hard to answer your question because we don't know the details of these zones yet. We were, I say we, the UN, were at a meeting where the three guarantors, Iran, Russian Federation, and Turkey were at. We provided some briefings for our principles, what we expect to see, but how these zones will be formed, the exact delineation of zones, what rules, procedures apply, we don't know yet. It's still in the dark. Now, but the first part of your question is important, and we have come out publicly and privately with any number of positions. I use the word safe zone advisedly. I recall what the Secretary General said when he was in Turkey some months back. He said the UN's had 70 years of experience with safe zones, and the experience has not been good. However, and this is, I also think, also pertinent, we're not going to turn down automatically any opportunity for humanitarian access. So if there was a zone, whether it's safe with a capital S or a lowercase s font 2, we'd want to see that the safety of the people in that zone is secured, that they have free movement to come and go, that they're not subject to any kind of bureaucratic security things that endangers their safety or gives rise to alarm, that humanitarian organizations, national, international, UN, have full, unimpeded, unstopped access. That's what we need. When I look at the safe zones as these have been put out, there's four, one in the north in Idlib Governorate and the other in the south in Daraa Governorate. We actually have good access to those two areas right now from our cross-border operations, which run quite effectively and very ably supported by the governments of Turkey and Jordan, by the way, and facilitated, if you will. So no one wants any of those operations anyway. Additional requirements, additional bureaucratic requests, more forms. You know, when we run these cross-line convoys in Syria, it's an 11-step process to get the green light. It's a second career for many of our staff on the ground in Damascus, filling out papers. So we don't want to see this happen in the so-called safe zones.
Can I just follow up really quickly? You said you had a meeting with these representatives. Was that in
We went
Astana,
to brief. It was in Astana.
Will you be invited to take part in the next round?
Inshallah, we will, yes.
But you don't know yet.
Stefan de Mistura will be in Astana representing you. Edie, then Masood.
Hi, Kevin.
Hi,
Edie. I just wanted to clarify some figures. Mr. O'Brien said that there are now 11 besieged locations with a total population of 540,000 people. You were talking about, I believe, 4.5 million people in desperate need. Please explain this to me.
The besieged, hard to reach. Maybe it's an art we've turned into a science. Those numbers, the 540,000 in besieged areas, are part of a larger group, which is the besieged and the hard to reach. So the total number is 4.6 million in besieged / hard to reach areas, and the besieged number is a subset of that. Clear?
Masood?
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. My name is Masood.
Yes.
Heather, I represent Daily Dawn newspaper of Pakistan. I just want to know, in the recent last 2 or 3 days, United States and President Trump has been again and again saying there's an imminent use of chemical weapons by the Syrians. I mean, do you think, how does the United Nations agencies respond to such a threat, if at all? And what do you do? How do you mobilize your sources to what you call protect the population that you are being entrusted to do?
Yeah, I mean, I really know nothing about the basis of this report, this allegation. I don't know. I don't know. Obviously, being subject to a chemical attack is a terrible thing. As you know, it's happened already in Syria several times. Impact on the civilians, impact on our own operators as well, too. I mean, matter of great concern. But I have no insight into this latest chapter.
So basically, you're unaware of these attacks, which has been again and again said are going to happen.
Well, we're aware the attacks happened in the past, but I'm not aware the attacks will happen in the future.
Okay.
On that wise note, Kevin, thank you very much.
Thank you, Stefan. Thank you all.